I'm Lauren Leader. I'm the founder and CEO of All In Together, which is hosting today's events in partnership with Microsoft. All In Together was founded 10 years ago as one of the very few truly bipartisan women's civic and political organizations in the country. We have been at all the conventions since our founding. Cleveland, Philly, the imaginary one that happened on the television in 2020, we weren't there, although we would have been if anything had been possible to be at. We run programs all across America to train mostly women on the tools of civic participation and political leadership. And because we are nonpartisan, we really focus on education, on understanding our civic process, understanding how government works, understanding how to have a voice, how to be a leader, how to speak up on the issues that matter to you, and how to understand our political process so that you can be a part of it and have a full and active voice. And as many of us are coming to appreciate and will learn today, and I'm learning every day, this topic of artificial intelligence and how it's going to affect our elections and affect democracy, not just here, but around the world, is one that we wanted to go deep on. And we are so lucky that one of our board companies is Microsoft, and our board member, Ginny Badanes, who you will be hearing from today, who leads the Democracy Forward initiative for Microsoft, which if you didn't know that existed, you will know more about it soon. It's really extraordinary. And the work that she does to bring integrity to elections around the world, to help educate the public and also people in the political process on how to understand the impact of technology on elections and on democracy around the world. All In Together runs programs all across America. We will be in Chicago for the Democratic Convention. You'll be welcome to join us there as well. But we also run a series of leadership programs in communities across the country: Texas, Arizona, Ohio, Florida, a lot of the swing states, particularly focused on training women in those communities to have a greater voice and participate politically. My staff in the back, it's Priya Alangavan and Emily Prendergast, who've worked really, really hard to put today together. And you are all, as you know, we have another program this evening, which is much less formal. It's not a training, it's more of a cocktail and a conversation. If you're not registered for that and you'd like to join us this evening, please just see the ladies before you go. And this is meant to be participatory and a learning experience. You're welcome to tweet and social and all of those things and talk to each other. So with that, I want to introduce, and you're going to introduce Ashley, right? So I'm going to introduce my amazing, amazing board member, Ginny Badanes. And I just have to say, I have learned so much from her in the time that she's been on our board. It is just a vast subject. We're all here at the very beginning, the cusp of the impact of how AI is going to change the world, and Ginny is at the cusp of helping people understand that. So please join me in welcoming Ginny Badanes.
Hey guys. All right, so what we want to do today is talk to you about the challenge of AI and how we think and are seeing AI impact elections, particularly with focus on deepfakes. But first I want to make sure to introduce Ashley O'Rourke. Ashley and I have known each other for a really long time. Ashley joined Microsoft
8 months ago?
8 months ago.
Yeah.
And she is part of our campaign success team. And so this is actually what she does almost full time. She works with political campaigns around the country, trying to help them understand how AI can both help them in their workspace, how can they use AI to do productivity things, but also think about sort of the implications of AI as it could be weaponized or used in a negative way. And then as Lauren alluded, part of what we're really starting to recognize and spend more time on is in particular the way that we see and anticipate this technology negatively impacting women. So we'll unpack some of that as we go through the conversation today. But this is really supposed to be a level-setting opportunity for you all to think about what both the opportunities of AI can be in this space, as well as what we see the potential risks of being. So obviously, as with any new technology, whether it's the printing press or the internet itself, there are always a lot of opportunities that can be used to advance society and in democracy in many cases. But of course, we recognize that there are risks there as well, that these technologies can be weaponized, adversaries can use them for intentions different than why they were developed. And it's our responsibility as a technology company who is developing a lot of this technology to look around corners and anticipate what we think might be weaponized. So while we are halfway through, for those who are tracking, the biggest global election cycle for democracies that the world's ever seen, and so far, we haven't, frankly, seen a lot of negative impact of AI on elections. Not to say that people haven't done deepfakes, they have, but we haven't yet seen some drastic impact to the results of an election, for example. But it's our job as technology companies, and again, specifically as an AI company, to anticipate and look ahead, because we don't know, obviously, what the next few months have in store for us as we go towards the US election. So as we think about opportunities and risks, this is a bit of the agenda of what we're going to go through today. I will note it's important for us to have a dialogue. We want to hear what you guys are thinking. Does this resonate? Did this make sense to you? What did we not cover? So we're going to save lots of time at the end for a conversation, for Q&A. There's a lot of material here that we could go way deeper on. We don't have a lot of time. But if you want us to, we can have side conversations. We can follow up with you. These are areas where we have obviously spent a lot of time thinking and really want to hear from you all. So we're going to start with sort of a little bit of an exercise. Which is, can you actually spot an AI-generated image? Yep, perfect.
And so it's funny, we've been doing probably, over 60 of these different trainings and workshops this year with close to 1,000 political organizations across the US. And as we've been doing them, I would say it's a mixed bag when we ask folks, how concerned are you with, the negative risks associated with AI, or how excited are you about using it? And when it comes to the topic of deepfakes, I would say it's a mixed bag. The reactions we get when we talk to campaigns, some are very worried about the potential for deepfakes to impact their election or to be generated about their candidate. Others not so much. And then you have folks, and you might know these people in your day-to-day lives, like, well, I can spot a deepfake. I can spot the AI-generated content. And a lot of times we'll walk them through this quiz, because I think one thing that we're really seeing is that, candidly, the technology is really advancing. And while it might have been easy to spot them, 3, 4 years ago, it's getting harder and harder every day. So we're going to do, trust me, this is the closest thing to homework we have as a group today. So I'm going to ask you guys to raise your hand. Do you think that image was artificially generated? So everyone thinks it's real? Yeah. Okay, let's check. Good job. Okay, pretty good. Okay, this photo. Raise your hand if you think it was artificially generated? Okay. I feel like we're doing good so far. Okay, good job, 100%. Okay, let's see if we can keep it up. What about this photo, artificially generated? Okay, I'm gonna go with most of the room says it's real. Okay, well, you guys, the instincts are spot on. Okay, what about this image, artificially generated? Okay, most folks think it's real. Keep going, and I think that's I think there's some with that early photo, I think it was the second one, it was very shiny, right? And I feel like there's certain types of signs that we've kind of started to associate with an AI generated content, but I think what we're starting to see is that more and more this content is just, they're really taking very close to real images and just making slight adjustments using AI. What about this photo? Do we think it's real? Or raise your hand if you think it's artificially generated. Okay, good job. Okay, we're gonna do one more. Do we think this is artificially generated? Okay, most of the group says it's real. Yeah, that was AI. And frankly, I think this is probably, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but that's really the concern. When you see images around wartime, war zones, right, in addition to the election space, I think that's one of the real risks. So, candidly, this was a great score. And we could keep going. We have URLs that we can share. You guys can take the quiz. You can send it to your friends. You can check your score. But, one thing as we're showing folks is that it is getting harder and harder to spot these AI-generated images. And really what we're trying to walk them through is make sure that our political campaigns and parties understand kind of what this threat landscape currently looks like going into the 2024 election. And there's a lot of different terms that get thrown around, right? Fakes, cheap fakes, misinformation, disinformation, right? And so really want to set the stage of what are we talking about when we're talking about deepfakes here? We're talking about fraudulent pieces of content that were manipulated or created using AI. And I really want to focus on that word manipulated, because sometimes people think a deepfake is just going to be a piece of AI content that was wholly created from AI. But really what the threat analysis team at Microsoft has found is that the pieces of AI-generated AI content that are most believable to the end user and to the voter are those that are simply real images that have been just slightly manipulated by AI, which I think makes a lot of sense, right? But I think it's also important to remember that not every single piece of AI-generated content is a deepfake, right? Deepfakes really are trying to deceive, and there's that intent there to portray something as real that is not. Whereas again, we are headed toward an election. There's a lot of activists that might want to like use AI to create fun images to like support getting out the vote, or to about their candidate, right? There's a lot of cool ways you can creatively utilize AI. Again, just because something is AI generated does not mean it's a deep fake. It's really that element of deception that's a key aspect of it. And how are we seeing people actively use AI in a kind of an adversarial use, right? We're seeing a lot of different tactics, right? And I think that's important to remember. It's not only just face swaps, right? Obviously, we've heard a lot of AI created deepfakes around audio, not just the video. A lot of times they're trying to clone the voice of the target, right? They're going to take a snippet of a video based on it used to have to be that the video had to be like at least 30 seconds long for them to generate a deepfake off of it, but now they're able to make much more compelling deepfakes off even shorter clips than that. And again, they're trying to clone that voice, and then they will put essentially words in that person's mouth, right? They will use text that will generate the speech for whatever they're trying to, the message that they're trying to send. And so actually I don't know if you guys are able to, you probably can't hear the audio. I also don't know how great your guys' Ukrainian is at the moment, right? But, this is a clip from President Zelensky. And what we're seeing more and more, especially around, the fear around the video and the audio, is that sometimes it's harder, again, for the naked eye to detect that something is fake. And it has especially around the audio use, is that it's probably the hardest form to actually tell that it's synthetically generated. Okay. And how are we starting to see this be used, right? Ginny said after the EU election just wrapped up, we saw some instances, and India also had their election recently. We saw some instances of AI-generated content and deepfake, but not really, I would say, like mass deception, especially in the EU election that just came up. But we have seen a lot of examples months of these bunch of different headlines that we've seen of deepfakes being created, really against candidates on both sides of the aisle. And I think that's something that we really want to focus, is that this is folks are being targeted on both sides of the aisle. We have the example of Carrie Lake right down in Arizona. Both President Trump and President Biden have been deepfaked as well. And one thing that our threat analysis team found is that some of the most compelling and believable deepfakes are not from these big federal candidates that you see all the time on TV. They're from local level officials and candidates for office. Because if you think about it, you probably don't know what your city councilman looks like, right? You probably don't listen to him talk all the time, or unless they're here. Right? And that's really a fear that I think sometimes there's this thought that, oh, I'm running down ballot, I don't need to worry about this issue of deepfakes. This really only applies at the federal level. But we've seen that some of the most believable deepfakes have been against people running in their local communities.
Can I give an example real quick? So I get asked a lot, as does Ashley, okay, but what have you seen in real world that's actually had an impact on elections? Have we seen any of this yet? And a lot of people immediately grab for the Biden robocall example in New Hampshire. So if you're not familiar, it was a deep fake of Biden telling Democrats not to vote during the primary. That was actually debunked pretty quickly. People were able to identify it wasn't really him. Election officials were able to, as was the media, as were the campaigns themselves, to denounce it, essentially say this isn't real. But there's a lesser known example that happened in Slovakia, where the candidate for their top office had a deepfake audio file 2 days before the election get released, where he was admitting to doing crimes of some sort. And it spread like wildfire across all sorts of different media platforms and text messages and whatnot. And that candidate lost a really close election. Now, I'm not trying to draw causation, because I don't know. Do we think that the deepfake impacted the results of the election? I don't know. But that's kind of the scenario that is a little bit the scariest, is that it's not clear whether it had an impact or not, and there wasn't enough time, and there wasn't the infrastructure set up to respond to it. The campaign didn't know how to respond when it started passing around. The media wasn't sure what to do as far as identifying whether it was real or not. I'll say some of the companies that had the information on their own platforms probably didn't respond quick enough in taking it down. And so ultimately, we're left with a bit of a question mark. So as we look forward to the 2024 US election, that's the scenario that concerns me, particularly at the local level, is that something comes out just a few days before. It's probably the most convincing type of deepfake we've seen is the audio deepfakes. They're really quite sophisticated and convincing, and that there's not enough time to respond, which is part why we're doing a lot of these sort of trainings and awareness campaigns, is so those who are involved in the political process are sort of tracking this and thinking through, what will I do, or what would I do if this happened to my candidate or to my organization? And we'll get into some of those action items. But for the real world examples, keep in mind that there are those that you've heard about that were kind of pretty easily debunked, and then there are those you may not have heard as much about that could have potentially had real significant impact.
Yeah. And, we touched on this a little bit about how this is impacting candidates on both sides of the aisle. The one group, candidly, that it's impacting probably the most is female women running for office. And this is really a fear that we have around the chilling effect that AI has. And this is, I thought, a great quote from a study that was done on this issue, that the rise of AI deepfakes could shift the demographics of who runs for office because bad actors disproportionately use synthetic content to target women. And really what we're seeing is that this is a new form of gender-based violence. I don't think I need to convince any of you that there is violence against women online, right? We've seen this be a problem for as long as the internet's been around, social media, right? And this is just another tool, AI as another tool in their arsenal. And again, there's the big fear of the chilling effect. And I thought this was some of these statistics, that a lot of this came out of a study that our AI for Good team put together on this issue. And I thought some of these stats were just very disturbing. It's 1 in 6 women leave politics globally during their first term in office, and at the same time, women face harassment online 60.9% more frequently than men. And I think it's hard to see that these two things aren't related, right? They're facing disproportionate attacks, and causing women to step away, and understandably so, right? Ginny, I know you've had a bunch of conversations with folks in the EU around this, and they've done a lot of work to address this, race profile.
This is an issue that we're trying to draw a little more attention to because we see this sort of trend of online harassment of women in public office or in public spaces coming together with the rise in deepfakes that tend to particularly focus on women. So, for example, there's a stat out there that says something like more than 90% of existing deepfakes are targeting women. Now, this is not necessarily in the political context. We're talking about just women generally. And they often are pornographic in nature, in fact, almost entirely. And so that's a disturbing trend in and of itself. So when you combine these different factors together and look at the trajectory, it's very concerning to see where this is going to go to impact women in public office. And to Ashley's point, the chilling effect it'll have on women wanting to step out and run for office or take some kind of position in the public eye, that is a daunting thing. That's going to make it even harder for them to want to do that. When I was in Europe recently, I was on a panel with the former Prime Minister of Finland, which I'm not sure how that happened, but she was, if you all recall, she was the young woman, she's very young, who had been recorded in a video with her friends sort of dancing, and a lot of people had turned it into a narrative that she was a partier, and there were some really negative things said about her. But she was saying that after that, the online harassment for her became so enormous that it drowned out anything else she was able to engage with online. And she was saying the number of deepfakes of her already out there online was already disturbing, and she's not even in office anymore. And she was talking about the challenges she faces. And at the same time, I realized that every woman on it was almost an entirely female panel, every woman on the panel had a story of something happening to them in a way that they had experienced this online, whether they were elected officials or just in the public eye in some kind of way as journalists. So there's some efforts underway in Europe. Vice President Jourova of the European Commission is thinking about this a lot, and they're working towards it. But I want to make sure that as we're having these conversations in the US, that we really think about the impact this technology is already having and can have, not just on women, but women in political life. So that's a big focus for us.
Yeah.
Lauren, yeah.
I'm sure you're going to get to this, but having been an elected official myself and been targeted, the biggest frustration is that it feels like there's never anywhere to go.
Yeah.
Like, there's no recourse. You can't really ask the social media sites to take it down. They don't respond. The police, like when there's threatening material, the police can't really do anything to take a police report. I think that's part of the problem is that, when you're the victim, you feel so helpless. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to get there, but it would be really interesting to hear, like, what do we think needs to happen, is happening in terms of, like, just even resources for people if they get targeted.
Yeah, we're gonna shift into essentially how you can respond if you're deepfaked generally, which the same lessons, frankly, will apply for women and being targeted in this specific way. So we'll get there as we go forward. But if for some reason you don't think that we addressed it sufficiently, bring it back and we'll continue.
Yeah.
No, of course.
No, it's a great point. And the reality is, like, as this is all unfolding, right, as we're seeing more deepfake content online, we're seeing it being used in the political space, voters are seeing these trends as well. And it's causing them to have major concerns. There's a stat that came out recently that 78% of voters are concerned about AI-generated content being used to impersonate elected officials. And that's a concern for a whole host of reasons, but not only are they aware of the problem, which is, I think it's a great thing that they're aware of this problem, but it's also causing them to distrust potentially authentic content and authentic communications that they're seeing online, whether that be from media organizations or for the campaigns themselves, right? If you're a campaign or candidate running for office, you want to be able to put out photos of your events and put out, press statements and videos, and you want voters to trust the content that you are putting out as a trusted source of information. And this deepfake issue is causing voters, again, just to lose that trust. So, now the question is, what are we as a tech company and what is civil society going to be doing to address this issue?
So now we're going to start talking. I think we've established the problem. I think everyone gets it now. I'm sure many of you were aware of it coming into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start talking about what can be done about it. And this is where we really are focused on. We do not like to show up places and say, here are all the problems. We like to talk about solutions. So we'll start where there's responsibility. And from our perspective, that's the technology companies. The AI companies in the first place have a responsibility when it comes to this. In February of this year, 20 plus big technology companies, the biggest ones for the most part that you've heard of, came together in Munich at the Munich Security Conference, and we did a couple of things. One, we signed an agreement that was called the Tech Accord. Actually, it's got a very long name, the Tech Accord. Oh, you see it up there.
Yeah.
But we came together to say, first and foremost, this is something that we do anticipate being a problem, and that we as technology companies will lean into it as responsible party. And while that may seem small, that's actually quite significant. It's different than what we've seen in other cycles where technology companies were sort of defensive after the fact. In this case, we were leaning into the challenge and acknowledging our role in it. So that was the first thing. The next thing we did is we actually came up with tangible, concrete commitments for what we would each do. And a couple of things that were interesting about this accord, we thought it was really important not just to get one type of company involved. There's sort of a supply chain when you think about the way that AI content is created and distributed. So there are those over on the side of like the creation. So think OpenAI, Anthropic, these big AI generation companies. So we made sure that we identified and pulled in those AI generation companies. And then there are those on what we call the distribution side. So that's where people are getting content, how this AI content is being distributed. So in that case, think TikTok, X, LinkedIn. And then there are companies that sort of sit in the middle of it, meaning we do both. And actually, Microsoft owns LinkedIn, so we have that capacity, but we're also on the generation side with our Copilot products, et cetera. So companies like Google and Meta sit on really both sides of that. And as you can see, there were quite a few other companies involved in it as well. So we started by acknowledging our role, leaning into concrete solutions, and making sure that we had a good representation of the challenge. Thank you. Yeah. And we bucketed our commitments into 3 different categories. One was we're going to address the actual creation of the deepfake content and have commitments around what we would do there. Think responsible models, think prompt responsibility, things to ensure that we had the right sort of safety architecture in place in the first place. So for example, on our products, Copilot products, you should not be able to create an image of a candidate in the US doing anything. That is a just responsible thing that we think we should put in place, particularly for this cycle, in order to ensure that people are not out there generating false images of our big political candidates. And then there's the detecting and responding to deceptive deepfakes. Again, going back to that word deceptive, because that's critical here. We're not talking about meme generations. We're not talking about campaigns themselves creating images of themselves. We're not talking about clearly labeled satire. That's not what this is about. This is about fraud. This is about someone trying to put someone else's words into the mouth of a candidate that is not them and that they don't speak for. And so how are we going to actually address that kind of content? And then finally, transparency and resilience. This is an area where first we're going to do our best with, and we'll get in a moment with things like labeling. We'll talk a little bit about that because that's a really complicated topic that sounds simple, but then when you drill in is actually kind of hard. But also a lot of things about being transparent about what we're seeing on our own platform. So for example, we have a tool, which again we'll talk about, where candidates can go and actually report a deepfake to Microsoft saying, I think I've been deepfaked, I'm going to report it here. We're going to be transparent about how often that happens and what actions we took when we got those kinds of things. That's just one example of what we mean by transparency.
Yeah, so we're now going to walk you guys kind of through these 3 pillars of the tech accord and actually how both Microsoft and a lot of the tech industry is actually responding to putting these into practice. So that first bucket is really around addressing the actual creation of deepfakes on our tools, right? it used to be, again, and the reason why we're trying to make it harder for folks to create deepfakes is because, again, it's harder to actually detect these with the naked eye. There used to be a lot of kind of common signs around how to spot a deepfake, right? Poor lip syncing, strange lighting, right? Things like where you have, these are like some examples, right? Of like, this gentleman has 3 hands, right? Again, be some very obvious ways you could spot, all right, again, or like just kind of like a mangled mess of like, technology in the middle, but it doesn't really seem real, right? Again, but the reality is it's becoming harder and harder. So how can we do this concept of like safety by design, right? There's ways we can have safer policies, but the idea is safety by design is how can we actually change the tools themselves to build in some guardrails about making it harder to create deceptive deepfakes. And so there's kind of pretty much a whole host of different solutions that folks, and part of the tech accord was not dictating to the different tech companies because every single tool and every platform is a little bit different, right? So the idea is kind of customizing this to your platform. But some of the things that we're doing here at Microsoft around this is ongoing red team analysis, preemptive classifiers. Those are going to be things around looking into the prompts and making sure to put some guardrails around, especially around the prompts in the election space, a blocking of abusive prompts, right? And actually testing and banning users who we've identified as abusing the platforms and the tools. So we're seeing a lot of different methods and of actually making it harder, but we're also aware, and kind of the reason why we have this next pillar of around detection and response is that we are also aware that while you can use tools like Designer or or Dolly, whatever, to create AI generated content, there's also tons of just open source AI tools that like a kid in his basement could take advantage of to create a deepfake, right? So we're aware that unfortunately we can make these tools as safe as possible, but it's not going to stop bad actors from actually being able to create these. So now we get into like the detection and response category.
So I'll start with the question that I get all the time, and again, I bet you do too, which is, isn't the solution to all of this to just be able to detect AI? Like, can't we just build like some kind of system where you put media in and it says, this is fake or this is real? And honestly, we thought the same thing about 5 or 6 years ago when as a company, we started sort of seeing this as an emerging threat and something that we thought would likely be a problem in the future, particularly around democracy. So we spent a lot of time, we had a lot of researchers working with other companies to build like the best detection system ever. And here's what we found out. There were times at which our detection was better than the technology that was used to deceive. And then there were times that the deception was better than our technology. It's like an arms race. We get better, they get better, we get better, they get better. And the challenge in that is you never know where you are in that cycle. You don't know if you're at the place where your detection is better or where their deception is better. And for that reason, while it's an important component, you see detection still up there, it is not the silver bullet. This is not the thing that solves the broader challenge. So instead, the tech industry, led by Microsoft and Adobe primarily, started to think about, well, if you can't prove when something's been faked, can you prove when it's authentic, when it's real? Is there a way to say that this is a real picture that was taken by a real person and somehow have that information attached to it? And so that led to a whole conversation we'll get into more detail about around this concept of content provenance and content credentials. So when you look at sort of the defense in depth approach that we're taking now to this challenge, because there's not a single element that you could apply that solves the problem, you instead have to have multiple elements. This is, for those who track cybersecurity, this is a similar approach to cybersecurity. Password's not enough. You also need a firewall, and you also need, right, you have these layers that you put in place that ensure you have a secure system. And so you would do the same thing here. Labeling of content is important. If you are a company that generates AI-generated materials, you should make sure that that is labeled in some way. And if you're one that distributes it, you should also label it. We won't get into the details. There's a lot of contention about what the right label is, and companies are sorting through that now, but that's an important component. Content credentials and watermarking, which are often conflated, and again, we don't have to get into all the differences, are actually two different technologies that are important and complementary. And so it's important to have both watermarking and this content provenance concept. And detection still plays a role. In fact, when someone generates an image on Dolly, or if they generate an image on Copilot, which is our product, we should be able to know that that came from us, right? And so we build these things called classifiers that mean that if we run an image through our own classifier, we would be able to say, yes, this came from our product, we made this. Now, it's really challenging to make that publicly available because it's like giving someone the key, right? If we made the classifiers available to the public, then the bad guys would figure out how to deceive it. So what we do is we work with an organization called True Media that kind of serves as an intermediary. And they do a lot of this detection work for journalists, nonprofits, political organizations, governments. they bring together a lot of these classifiers in sort of a protected place where then people they're working with can run media through and get some kind of score of likelihood that something was AI generated. Now, it's really important that that not be used as 100% fact, that it's just one component of your investigation if you're a journalist, for example. But it is a good way to make sure that detection is still a piece of the puzzle. And then finally, literacy. This is hugely, hugely important. And in fact, if you made me choose one of these, you're like, you have to choose one to be the silver bullet, which again, we've acknowledged doesn't exist, I would choose literacy. Because ultimately, if we get to a place where people are just sort of savvy consumers of information and they question things and they ask, is this real? And they look for sources to confirm it. If they kind of have that muscle built where they don't necessarily believe everything that they see, but aren't distrustful of everything either, if we can get to a place where we have like kind of resilience like that, I think that we'll find that a lot of the attempts that people make to deceive us, to defraud us, would be a lot less successful. Okay, so we have a couple different slides here where it kind of depends on where you sit in the space. We know we have people here who are sort of in the media space, some are in the political space, some nonprofit. You guys have all sorts of business. You have all sorts of different backgrounds. So some of this may resonate with you and some of it may not. But if you are in a place where you think that yourself or your principal or someone around you could be deepfaked, it's important to think through what would I do if I encountered that? If I come across a deepfake of my candidate, we'll just use that example, what is it that I can do, to Lauren's point, to actually like take some control? Because what we hear from political campaigns a lot is that they just feel like if this happens, it's out of control and there's nothing they can do. So what can you do to take some kind of control? The most important thing is that you have a plan in place. It's important that you have someone who's sort of your point person, that everybody knows is going to be the coordinator if this happens. And you'll see their handouts on the tables if you guys want to take it. It has a lot of this stuff in there in even more detail. It's also important to do credentialing of your media. I'm going to let Ashley talk about what that means. That gets to this content provenance concept. But essentially, if you have tagged your own content as a campaign, your images, your videos, your audio files with this content provenance, then you have a way of saying that this is authoritatively from us, which helps you in some ways if someone attempts to deepfake you.
Yeah, one thing I'd add here is that largely as a result of the tech accord is that we're seeing more and more of the main like tech distribution platforms, again, think social media sites where you're disseminating content, they have all started having much more, I would use the term robust, rules and regulations around AI content, not banning it, but largely so having rules on labeling, right? Or, and what the different requirements, and again, largely it's a different platform by platform. And so this is something as we're talking to, especially political organizations who might be running ads this cycle, is make sure you're aware of what your responsibilities are to the consumers that might be seeing your content online, right? Again, it's not saying, the AI label doesn't make it inherently bad, right? You're just making sure that you are disclosing, because if you don't disclose, you're at risk of getting it taken down, right? So I think that's really critical here. And just going back to Lauren's point is that Microsoft and other tech companies are making sure that there's ways for campaigns to report if deepfake happens. So there is a website here, aka, it's also in the handouts, but aka.ms/2024 elections, where campaigns can actually go and say, hey, a deepfake of me has been spotted. And there's a form you have to fill out, and it will go back to our team to review that content, verify that it violates our policies, and it actually will kick off the steps for it being taken down. And to Jenny's point about having a plan, make sure, one thing we're telling campaigns is make sure you have an understanding of where to go to file that request, and also who on your team should be the one to file that request. And a lot of this might seem straightforward or logical, of course you should have a plan for this, but the reality is 99% of the campaigns that we talked to didn't really worry about this as much last cycle. This cycle, 2024, is going to be really the first main cycle where this issue of deepfakes is really going to be playing a more central role. And so campaigns are starting to have to really, for the first time, think about how do we build a plan? And we're urging them to build a plan now, right? Sooner rather than later, because it's not fun to have to build one as you're going through a crisis. So the document we have in front of you guys is our best practices for building a deepfake response plan, and it's something we've been sharing with folks. And there's a whole host of things, right? Again, identifying who on your team's responsibility is to, actually request that it gets taken down, who's working on maybe a press release, there might be a legal response depending on it. And we also talk about, it's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek of the Streisand effect, right? We have this grid in here of, determine how aggressive you want your response to be of the deepfake, right? And we encourage folks to measure it by, how nefarious the content content is by how likely it is for you to cause you to lose votes or lose supporters, right?
Do you guys know what the Streisand effect is?
Yeah,
Some
right?
people
Okay.
do.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. A
phenomenal,
lot of
yeah.
people don't know what it means.
I also love Barbara Streisand, so no disrespect. Right.
She's a great singer. But she, actually, I don't know if I have the full details on it, but there was essentially a story about her that came out that she deemed untrue, but was only like spread in a couple small places.
Like no one paid attention to
No one
it.
was paying attention to it, and she decided to like come out, full-throated. This isn't true. This isn't real. And all it did was draw attention to the original story that nobody had been paying attention to in the first place. And now that was the story, the fact that this had happened in the first place. So the idea is you have to kind of walk that line of like, is this going to actually take off, or am I giving too much oxygen to this story that probably isn't going to go anywhere if I don't say anything about it? Like if you as a political campaign have some big platform and you just go and share it with all your supporters, you've actually given it oxygen. It probably wasn't going anywhere. So it's a little bit of judgment call on understanding what that sort of trigger is and when you should lean in on something to debunk it or let your supporters know it's not real versus when you probably just want to sit back and watch what happens because you might accidentally give it more oxygen than it should have.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the other part of like, encouraging folks to build a incident response plan around deepfakes is thinking of, Ginny talked about, are there any proactive steps that we as a campaign or a party could be taking to protect our media, to protect our content that we're generating? And it really goes to kind of the digital watermarking and the content credentials topic. So around, again, that third pillar of the tech accord is transparency and resilience, right? A big part of this is how can we ensure that our voters have the tools and resources they need to navigate the shifting media landscape and the content that they are encountering online. So, a big focus of Microsoft's is we're launching public affairs campaigns around this issue. We recently did one in the EU, the UK, and France ahead of their elections. We'll be kicking off one, actually I think it has kicked off this week, in the US leading up to the election, to really try to educate voters on how they should be looking at the content online and making some determinations on that. And I think, really, especially when they're encountering information online around the ideas of when, where, and how to vote, right? Maybe not just trusting the random social media post, but really going more to authoritative sources, right? Go to your, the state elections authority, right? And really kind of leaning into those the places that are actually running and operating the elections. So that's a big part of it. And being able to, identify certain red flags. We talked about some of the, historical trends of spying deepfakes, but really, to your point about the importance of literacy, really that's the goal here, is making sure that we give voters, the tools they need to have a healthy dose of skepticism with maybe some of the content that they're seeing online. And the great part about this is, kind of civil society's response to this issue is that we're seeing more and more organizations, like we've got up here an example from UNESCO, of putting out some great resources for voters on how they can make these different, determinations on their own. And so now we're going to come to content credentials, and this is a technology that we're really excited about. Now, if you guys are like me, I had never heard of the term content credentials before I came to work at Microsoft, right? Again, when we go out and talk to campaigns, I'm like, how often do you think about digital watermarking? They're like, what? Never, right? We're planning our Get Out the Vote campaign, right? But, as we talked about, we can try to make it harder for deepfakes to be created, but ultimately, how can we protect the authentic content that organizations are putting out there? And I think the concepts that are again around digital watermarking and content credentials do get used kind of interchangeably. They're technically slightly different. Content credentials at their core, though, the idea is you are cryptographically embedding metadata into a piece of content that's online. So think about it could be an image, it could be a video, it could be an audio file. And this all came about, this is not a technology that's proprietary to Microsoft. We actually are part of a coalition of companies called the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which I saw today was like over 100 companies are now a part of it. I think these are just some of the screenshot, the companies listed above were just some of the original organizations. But really what this coalition has done is we created a technical standard, right, that everyone in the space can read, and we can all utilize the same technical standard for embedding this metadata and reading it, because really that's the important thing, right? You can embed this information. This information could include things on where a photo or video was taken or captured, if the AI was utilized in that process or not. It can include things if the actual image was edited or altered in any way. And then ultimately, also always kind of like the main part of it is it stamps it with where did that image come from. That could be stamped from the tool that was used. Again, if it was an AI tool, it could be coming from, this was created using a Microsoft AI tool, or it could come from your organization. And what we're trying to do is, again, inform the public and give people more information on where the content that they're seeing is coming from. And why is this important, right? We're trying to, so a big focus of ours now is, again, this is a brand new technology that campaigns were not thinking about before, is trying to really push this in the political space, because we really think that there's a value here that it can empower campaigns to have greater control over their own likeness and image. And really what this looks like in practice, because I would say, Ginny, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like one of the main industries that really embraced this technology in the beginning was media, right? And so that screenshot up there is from the BBC, and this was a video that was posted on the BBC's website, and you'll see actually they are displaying for us the content credentials. So they're essentially just reading the metadata that were tied to this video, and so you can see some information on where it was originally posted, when it was created, it has a lat long, and then whether or not it was edited as well, right? And again, you're trying to say the way that the trust model works for the technology, it's not saying that the presence of content credentials or the lack thereof makes something less trustworthy. They are displaying information about the content, and then it's upon the end user, the voter, right, the person actually encountering it, to make that kind of trust judgment on their own. The bottom photo is actually from a LinkedIn post. So LinkedIn recently announced that they were going to be displaying content credentials on any media that's uploaded with them on the site. So you can kind of see how it might look if you were interacting with content on LinkedIn. You can kind of see in the upper left corner of that photo, there's a little circle. You would hover over it, and then it would pop up with the box that's kind of on the right, and it would actually display whatever content credentials were on there, right? Again, where it came from.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go for it, yeah.
Fast forward to a few years down the road, the objective here is just like when you go online, you're going to enter a credit card number. We all know now not to enter it unless there's that little lock icon in the URL, right? The idea is that when you go online and you're looking at an image and you're like, I wonder, if is that new? Is that recent? Is that look at all the wars underway and all the pictures that have been reused from previous crisis and being displayed and pretended that it's a current war, right? Without having that original context of recognizing that picture, you don't have anything to go on. But if you have this little content credential icon, you scroll over it, you can actually see the details of, that was created in 1998. That is not an accurate current photo. You can see more details behind it. So we want to get to a place where, just like you expect a URL or a little lock icon, you kind of expect a little more info button that just tells you more about an image, where it came from, more context about it, so that you can make informed decisions about whether you want to pass that information forward, believe it, et cetera. I mean, I think about this every time there's like a hurricane and someone posts a picture of a shark swimming in the streets, right? We've all seen that like 5 million times, and it happens over and over again. We'd like to get to a place where you have a little icon that tells you that's either AI generated or that's a super old image and not relevant to the current story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ginny, we were talking about this just recently. It's like, we'll be watching the news, and regardless of what channel you're on, how frequently we hear from the journalists, especially when there's breaking news of, we are going to, as a newsroom, exercise caution on the content we are displaying. We see a lot on social media, but we want to verify the authenticity of the content before we put it on TV. And in our mind, again, there's no silver bullet to this problem, but content credentials are just a way to help, especially in the media space, give them one more piece of information that could help make part of that trust judgment. And so here's how it works. There's actually, you can use content credentials in tons of different ways. If any of you guys use Photoshop, like it's a common tool that political or campaigns are using for their media, right? It's actually embedded into Photoshop. You just have to simply click a little box. You probably didn't realize that. There's now cameras that are being released that have content credentials built into the cameras themselves. And so we're seeing people, again, using content credentials at capture, again, when they're taking images or just credentialing their raw photos. We're seeing them, if they're especially, again, more of like the ad space, they'll actually credential at the end of a process. But Microsoft, we actually have a free tool that is available in a private preview for political organizations, really organizations in the election space. So we're also working with a number of news organizations on content credentials as well. And what our tool allows you to do is you as an organization, think if you're a campaign, you're a political party, you get issued a certificate that is essentially has your organization's name on it. There's a very long and lengthy vetting process, as you can imagine, that goes through to prove that said individual works for said organization, right? And once you are issued that certificate, you have the ability, it's a very simple drag and drop functionality where you can actually put your certificate on a piece of content that your campaign has created. Again, it could be raw photos that were taken at a rally or a political event that you did, or it could be like kind of a finalized ad, or it could, again, like also could be an AI generated image that you guys created. And there's kind of like a screenshot here, because I'm a visual person, so when I was like learning about this concept, I was like, okay, it's showing metadata. What does that actually look like? So the idea is that not only can you, as an organization, put your mark or put your certificate on a piece of content, but you can also then check content, right? You could upload a photo that maybe you encountered online and see if there are any content credentials on that piece of content and read what they say. And so here's kind of just a screenshot of what that might look like, right? So in this example, we can see that that photo was edited using AI, components were removed, and the image was cropped. And because it had been credentialed over time, we can actually see what the original photo looked like versus what the final one that you received, right? And then you can also see the credits, which is essentially who the certificate was issued to, in what organization or individual it came from. And so really, again, as we're working with campaigns, it's exciting. The RNC is going to be utilizing it this week here in Milwaukee, and we're really excited by their use of it. But again, it's the idea that they're going to be putting their stamp on the credentials. And the best analogy, as I was getting started with this technology, is a tamper-proof seal, right? If you ever think of a medicine bottle and a tamper-proof seal, you can still open the medicine bottle, right? You can break these credentials, right? They can be manipulated, but you'll be able to see that they were manipulated. They'll be broken, essentially, right? So the presence of content credentials doesn't mean someone can't tamper with the image, but because you've embedded that metadata, we'll be able to see that someone was manipulated the content that you've credentialed, which I think is really kind of the benefit to the technology.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We want to make sure we hear from you. So a couple takeaways. Actually, Ashley's been, as I mentioned, going around the country and a little bit globally too,
Yeah.
working with political actors and organizations about this topic. And one thing that comes up a lot is like, but how can I actually use AI in a positive way? So I'll let her talk about that a little bit. This isn't supposed to be a commercial for how you use AI positively, but we've seen that there's real interest in that. So
Yeah.
a little bit about what you've seen.
No, it's funny. I would say it's a bit of a mixed bag. And we've been doing a lot of these conversations. And I recently was here talking to a bunch of state party chairmen. And we were talking about the risks of AI and deepfakes, but then also some use cases that we're seeing of campaigns leveraging the technology. And I had, candidly, the wrong assumption. I thought they were going to be way more focused on the negative impact of it, but they were way more excited, candidly, about the positive uses. And I thought that was really interesting because, again, these people are trying to get out the vote. They're trying to activate their voters, and they're trying to help campaigns down ballot. And if any of you guys have worked on a local race or at a state party organizations, you know that they are understaffed and they're always struggling to raise money, right? It's like the hallmarks of those organizations. And so they were so excited about the time-saving ability of artificial intelligence and generative AI specifically. And so when we walk them through different use cases of how we're seeing campaigns use the technology, from drafting communications to repurposing content, taking a blog post that the state party chairman put out and repurposing it for a social media post, right? Like, they get really excited about that because it helps them save time and potentially communicate with voters more efficiently. As we've been going around, we've been hearing more use cases from folks because I think it's exciting for us to hear how campaigns are taking the technology and running with it. Coalition building was one I heard from a group of state legislators of how they were actually using the technology. They'd say, okay, we just put forth the bill that we were working on, that we were sponsoring, and we asked, an AI tool, okay, help us draft communications to different demographics of voters that we're trying to reach, framing kind of this initiative of pushing this legislation. And again, if you've worked on a campaign, like coalition building is a huge aspect of it. And again, it can help you create messages for different groups of voters. And really, I think that time-saving ability of AI is really exciting. I think we're just kind of at the start of how we're seeing campaigns take advantage of technology.
All right, just a few things to remember. This is just summing up what we already talked about. There's both opportunity and, of course, there's risks. So there's a lot of opportunity for creativity and productivity. And then, as we mentioned, there are risks. So you want to be trained and planned and proactive, and then be part of the solution. So lean in on how you can be a positive impact on this how this technology is used, and make sure that you know how to protect yourself and your organization. Yeah. And that's it. Now we want to hear from you all, like what questions you have. So that's it from us. Oh, thanks.